Welcome to the Close Encounter Club. I'm your host, Justin Gearhart. Today, we have a very special bonus episode featuring Matt Hurley, the mind behind the website BadAliens.info, which is a resource for some of the most intense and controversial UFO research out there. Joining us is Josh from Noble Park, Episode 4, who played a huge role in making this conversation happen. As I mentioned in a previous episode, Josh and I have become pretty close friends, and he asked me if there's anything he could do to help the podcast, and I had asked him to reach out to some experts and to see who we can land to have interesting conversations on the show. Just a few days later, I got a message from him saying that he reached out to Matt Hurley, and Matt was interested in talking to us. So here we are. For those of you that don't know, Matt has been investigating the darker side of UFO encounters, from abductions to mutilations to the unsettling patterns of human disappearances. His story begins as a young boy, captivated by the phenomenon, and evolves into a journey of skepticism, discovery, and a mission to shed light on the shadowy aspects of extraterrestrial encounters. In this episode, we cover everything from ancient alien theories to the unsettling parallels between animal and human mutilations, the psychology behind cryptid sightings, and even how quantum mechanics might intersect with the extraterrestrial. But before we get started, I need to say something. Listener discretion is absolutely advised throughout this whole episode. So if you feel uncomfortable about talking about death and human mutilations, you may want to skip this episode. And as much as I want to promote Matt's website, BadAliens.info, that same trigger warning is very much in effect because there are pictures on there that might mess you up. So it's very graphic, and just be aware of what you're doing. Okay, so for those of you that are going to be sticking around, this is a bonus episode with Matt Hurley from Bad Aliens and Josh Barretto. And you're listening to the Close Encounter Club.
So I had an interest since I was a child, probably about 7 or 8 it started. I think it was triggered by watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I didn't have any sightings or any weird experiences in childhood, so there was no trigger there. When I was about 11, I went to the local library and I'd look at the UFO section. I wouldn't read the books then, I would just look at the pictures in the middle sort of thing. That would sort of, spark my interest a little bit. I think the seminal moment for me was when I was about 19 and I read Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. Read it from cover to cover in a few days, and I was amazed by the amount of data in there and information, and from that moment onwards, the UFO subject sort of always been with me. I started going to conferences soon after. Then I joined a local UFO group around about the mid-90s. Started off nuts and bolts like a lot of people do, and then got drawn into the challenge side, which at the time was very seductive. All these people claiming to be in contact with beings, and these wonderful promises of sorting out all the problems on Earth, etc., and ascension. After a while, I sort of smelt a bit of a rat. They seem to make predictions that don't come true, while the information contradicts one another. And it almost put me off the subject. I did put it on the back burner for a few years. And then round about the late 90s, I became interested in UFOs in ancient history. And I had a book published in 2003 called The Alien Chronicles. I think I was probably a little overzealous with the analysis at the time I was doing, because almost any artwork which seemed to have a UFO in it, I would be putting on my website and including the book that came out at the time. I did have a section in the book which looked at historical UFO sightings, which I think has a certain value to research. So, yeah, that came out in 2003. And then the Bad Alien side of things, that started about 4 years ago when someone sent me a link to a website called thealliesofhumanity.org, which was basically 4-volume work of channel information from a group of aliens who call themselves the Allies of Humanity. Now, like I said previously, I became really skeptical of channeling, and my initial reaction to it was, oh no, not more channel rubbish. But when I started reading what the Allies had to say, it painted a different picture of the UFO phenomenon. Rather these occupants being spiritually wise and having lots of wisdom and being beneficial to us, it painted a picture of people being taken against their will. Some people aren't being returned. Animals are being mutilated. There are humans being mutilated. So it painted a very dark picture to what I was used to. And when you read information like that, it's good to look at the data. You know, is what I'm reading matching what I see in the field? Well, yes, there are people being abducted. There are animals being mutilated. There are some cases of few mutilations. There are strange cases where people go missing. So from that point onward, it's a bit of an epiphany, really. And that's what inspired me to create my website. And that's the sort of position I'm in now, really, where I talk about the occupants of these craft in maybe a more of a darker, realistic tone than some other people do.
It's funny, you actually checked off like 4 of my intro questions as you were doing that. So that was well done. Awesome. What would you say is the mission of BadAliens.info? Just simply getting the information out there to the general public, or is there a deeper meaning to it?
I think essentially I'm trying to break it down into its constituent components. So within the UFO phenomenon, we've got abductions, we've got mutilations, we've got people going missing. I'm trying to take a lot of the mystery away and make it a little bit more black and white. In one of the sections, I also touch on the woo aspect as well and poltergeist phenomena, that sort of thing. I see it as a nuts and bolts phenomenon with a woo aspect, whereas some other people see it as a very interdimensional and a bit of a nebulous phenomenon. I see it as physical beings that are coming here. They're interested in physical things on our planet, be it animal body parts or human body parts or whatever flora and fauna they may be interested in as well, that our planet is an attraction to them. I don't see it as interdimensional. I see it as physical beings coming here. There's 200 billion stars in our galaxy. So I go with Occam's razor, if you like. And so I think to sort of answer your question, I'm saying that the visitors are physical and they're interested in the resources of this planet. And there may be 1 or 2 sources of information out there that might be quite a concrete source to read and analyze. And the Allies of Humanity information I would recommend to people if they're sort of starting off in the subject and want to maybe have a good grounding in it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, so I'm going to be checking that out after this interview. What would you say? You mentioned ancient art and history, and I've seen some pretty incredible cave drawings, even some religious paintings that are, hundreds and hundreds and even sometimes thousands of years old. What would you say? Do you feel like ETs have been coming here for thousands of years, or when do you think this whole thing started?
I think they may have been coming here for thousands of years. I mean, as well as pictorial descriptions, there are also a lot of written accounts. Most cultures around the world talk about beings coming down from the stars, imparting wisdom to various tribes. It might be how some religions have started around the world as well, some of the spiritual principles that certain cultures have cultivated. So I think, when you read between the lines that there's visitations throughout history, there's a lot of metaphors. I saw a flying earthenware vessel, or they use a lot of metaphors to sort of describe what they were seeing. So, I mean, there's Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia. There's a book he wrote in about 2007. I can't remember the name of it now, where he looks at the ancient astronaut theory. Where I would maybe disagree with some people is I don't think necessarily the critters that are here at the moment abducting people, it may not necessarily be the same ones that were coming here thousands of years ago imparting wisdom. I think we've got a different sort of actor on the stage that's been here for the last sort of 60, 70, 80 years. I don't think necessarily they were the ones that were coming thousands of years ago with a more spiritual bent to their communication.
Are there any patterns that you know of from from the ancient art and history that would be relevant to what's happening in like the current affairs?
I wouldn't say so, no. I mean, the thing is, with a lot of the religious art I used to look at, I think with the wisdom of hindsight, a lot of it is religious symbology. There's a famous fresco in Kosovo from the 1300s that's got two egg-shaped craft in the sky with a figure in each. Yeah, it's quite often regurgitated on Twitter and so forth, but it's actually a symbolic representation of the sun and the moon. So at the time, I didn't have that art history angle on when I was looking at these images. So I think you need to be careful with how we interpret ancient artwork. And it is very easy to see what you want to see in some of these old paintings. But there are some sketches, some illustrations of actual UFO sightings. There's one from 1479 in Arabia of like a pencil-shaped object that someone's drawn. So it's nothing to do with religion, no religious symbology. So yeah, there may be some good examples there of visitation of art history, but in terms of patterns, I wouldn't say I've noticed that really.
One pattern that I've learned about from your website that I was unaware of, and it is the not safe for work topic that your work addresses, is the human mutilations. And everyone always talks about cattle mutilations, and I've seen videos of cattle with like the laser or the very fine edges around their skulls and the circular holes that seem to be perfect and the no blood aspect of it, all those things. And everyone always talks about that. And then I went on your website and Josh warned me about some of the images, but I was shocked when I looked at them. There's such a direct comparison between what you see in those cattle mutilations and what some of those images.
Yeah, I mean, when I created the website, I thought I've got to include a human mutilation section because it's an area that a lot of ufologists aren't covering. As you say, they keep talking about cat mutilations. It's not even just cat, it's all sorts of animals, including seals, dolphins, etc., horses, all sorts, even small animals like mice. There's an abduction case in England from the 1990s, found who'd been abducted. And one day there was a row of mice that were found outside, all in a row with a tiny hole in their heads. So it's occurring on a micro and a macro scale, if you like, these mutilations. But yeah, we've got the human ones. There aren't as many cases in the public domain as with the animal mutilations. I mean, you could argue with the missing 411 cases where people disappear and they're not returned, maybe a percentage of those end up mutilated in some fashion but aren't found, which may bridge the gap in the numbers with the animals. But it's a sensitive area to cover because obviously when you're putting dead people on a website, someone's loved one, someone's relative, family member. So I can kind of see why maybe some other researchers have steered clear of covering this topic, but I thought it's an important thing to include really, and it's quite sober. I can't say for sure they were done by ETs. All I can do is point out the parallel similarity of the injuries, with the animal mutilations. But I'll be honest, it's the most popular part of my website. When I look at my statistics, that's what's pulling most of the people in, that the human mutilation aspect, partly because it hasn't really covered in any great depth elsewhere.
Do you think that's the primary reason why other ufologists and other people in the community don't talk about it, just because of the sensitivity of it?
There's that. I think as well, everyone's got their safety zone. Some people, for example, don't think animal mutilations are a thing. They're all done by humans. Some people think animal mutilations are done by ETs, but they don't think human mutilations are a thing. So I think everyone's got their own sort of belief paradigm, what they're sort of safe with, what they feel comfortable with. And maybe for some people, human mutilations are a bit too far, pushing the paradigm a bit. But what comes raised, if they're doing it to animals, I suspect they're probably doing it to humans. I mean, there's a lot of evidence say people have been abducted, so it's not a massive leap of faith to think that, some people are unfortunate and end up being mutilated as well.
Yeah, and if you are brave enough or comfortable enough to look at those images, it's really easy to draw a parallel between what happened to those people and other animal mutilations. It's really fascinating. It's very fascinating.
I think it's now the authorities that like being talked about in any great detail, and obviously they don't want the masses to be scared. But I can say my site's been up for 3.5 years and I haven't had any officialdom contact me or any pushback at all.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities with crop circles, actually. And it might be a little bit of a stretch, but crop circles I think are the same because there's so many of them, and some of them are done by humans. And just because one is done by a human or a group of people have come out and said, "Oh yeah, we hoaxed that one over there," all of a sudden, all of humanity says, "Oh, they all must be fake, or they all must be done by humans." And I think even if there was just one cattle mutilation that was done by a human, it's our natural disposition because it's probably uncomfortable to say they all must be done by humans. And I think there's evidence out there that shows that it's almost impossible. Even just the blood, the fact that I'm not even sure how many quarts of blood a big piece of cattle has, but to have it laying there with no blood and have no blood in it and not a drop of blood around is just, I don't even know if we have the technology to do that.
If it is humans as well, they haven't been caught for 60 years. So that's another thing to bear in mind.
Yeah, there is something really disturbing. I can understand why, a lot of people would be adverse to covering the topic, but just on that point, the lack of blood that seems to appear or that isn't there, and it's consistent across most of the cases that are on your website, Matt, is a really interesting one, and some of those holes that appear, and in some instances, I believe there's even organs missing and things like that, but without.
Yeah, what really happens is you get these cookie cutter marks on the limbs and the torso, and the NHI seem to suck out through these holes they make any innards. Often the rectum is sucked out. So if you have some sort of sucking procedure that rips out whatever they want. And normally eyes are taken, lips, tongue.
Are you familiar with the story of Saint Francis of Assisi?
No, I'm familiar with some historical religious figures that could levitate. I know that's been talked about, but go on.
So Saint Francis of Assisi, Catholic saint, all his religious works aside, he was the first person to experience stigmata, I believe, that we're aware of. And his account of what happened to him before that is quite remarkable. He was outside. He was, I believe, doing some writing and praying, and he had like an assistant, for lack of a better term, with him, someone who was studying with him, and they saw, as they described it, as like a seraphim come down. So like a heavenly being. They described it, I believe, as being in the shape of a crucifix, and then a light coming off it and hitting Saint Francis, or just Francis at the time, I guess. Shortly after, he had these holes appear on his hands. And it's just described as very neat round holes, and a tiny little bit of bleeding. And, it's not just about that experience. It's what happened afterwards, as he became very sick and eventually died from this experience. And, he was canonized later on as a saint. And, this is one of the things that led me into your work, Matt, is his story is covered really interestingly in Diana Pasulka's book, who was granted access to the Vatican archives, and she was studying a different topic. And then whilst in the Vatican archives came across so many examples like this that she decided to sort of change direction and look into that phenomena a little more. But, we have examples from antiquity, like St. Francis. We have, examples that are on your website from going back to the 60s, 70s, all the way up to 2000 and was it 19 or 20? There's something quite recent in your site?
Poltergeist phenomena has been logged going back to the 1600s by the Royal Society in Great Britain. Scholars at the time were experiencing and observing weird phenomena. So, if something's occurring today, it's probably been occurring for a long time. And yeah, what else is in the Vatican that we don't know about?
Yeah, absolutely.
On your website too, the hitchhiker effect is something that I've heard about through Skinwalker Ranch, but I've actually, in my own mind, when I was watching that show, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, is really how I know a lot of my knowledge about Skinwalker Ranch, to be transparent. In my own mind, I'm like, I wonder if there's an ET connection to this, because some of the stuff was kind of hitting that nerve for me. And then on your website, I read that all your work on on the hitchhiker effect. And could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more? And how is it that it's connected?
So a lot of abductees, not all, but a lot, experience poltergeist phenomena. And there are a lot of people that aren't abductees that experience poltergeist phenomena. And what a lot of parapsychologists think is that in some people, when they become vexed or very stressed, they can involuntarily produce psychokinesis in their environment. So glasses might smash, doors might open in, which is one example of the hitchhiker effect. However, I think there's like how could I describe it? There's like a different type of hitchhiker effect. If you heard of Axelrod, he was one of the guys that visited Skinwalker Ranch. And when he returned home, his family was seeing like weird entities in the garden. I think it was like a dog man or some wolf type creature. I think in that case, I think ETs are generating a sort of a three-dimensional, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like a projection.
Like a hologram?
Yeah, hologram, yeah. I think you've got you've got a hitchhiker effect where holograms are being created, possibly to scare or intimidate people. But then this is the other type, the first type I mentioned, where it's sort of involuntary psychokinesis, and that's the individual doing it. So with that type, it's the individual doing it, which may be from an ET abduction, or it could just be that they're in a situation where they're very vexed. And then the other type is where I think there's more of a director, more from the ET itself, that's creating a lot of these projections. You hear cases, for example, on the ranch where they'll see some weird creature, they shoot at it and nothing happens. I think, in my opinion, they're sort of holographic projections that are being created by the aliens to intimidate or to confuse. I think a lot of the cryptid industry, if you like, is due to alien projections. There's often a connection between UFOs and cryptid sightings. That's my theory on it anyway. But, you know, if you put alien abductions to one side, poltergeist phenomena, there does seem to be a correlation between individuals who act as a focus and they get into a certain state where they can trigger physical changes in their environment. And maybe alien abduction is so traumatic to the person's psyche that puts them in that mode where, you know, weird stuff can happen around them.
It sounds like you're not completely closed to the idea that there's like an interdimensional component to this with the holograms, but you're saying that the abductions themselves are more of a physical act. Am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah. I think abductions are physical, the beings are physical. I mean, if you want to talk about dimensions, I'm of the belief that we're physical beings with a spiritual component, and when we pass, we'll go to the other side. There's lots of accounts of near-death experiences. There's lots of accounts of reincarnation stories with young children describing past lives in great depth. So you could argue we're all interdimensional in that sense, but I'm dealing with you physically, even though you might be a spiritual being like I am. So I will have to deal with an alien as a physical species, even though it might survive its own death.
Are you familiar with the new podcast that came out called the Telepathy Tapes, by chance?
You know, I've read about it, but I haven't actually delved into it. I'm of the understanding, is it experiments with autistic kids and their abilities in telepathy? Is that essentially what it's about? Yeah. I haven't actually listened to anything yet. I will have to do that.
I'll let Josh explain it because he's actually the one that got me into it early on. It was only on I think the first episode had just released, and Josh was like, dude, you got to check this out. So could you explain the Telepathy Tapes and Diane Powell's work, Josh?
Yeah, so it is, as you described, Matt, it's effectively nonverbal autistic children whose mothers and primary carers and sometimes whose teachers recognized some sort of telepathic ability in the child. It often started with mothers trying to hide presents and snacks from the children so they wouldn't find them. And then, moments after doing that, the kid walks around the house and finds every single one immediately. That then prompted them to engage in other sort of home tests with their kids. Or in some instances, these children going to their parents and just saying to them, look, I can read your mind. I can hear your thoughts. It started with kids who had learned the ability to spell independently, so they could actually respond without prompting or without assistance and communication from their parents, just using a keyboard. But they have conducted over the course of the podcast, but also the work of Diane Powell goes back further than this, a number of experiments, blind experiments where they can use random number generators. They can get pictures, colors, all those sorts of things, have them on a piece of paper with the child across the room and a barrier in between them. And these kids are accurate in their ability to read what's on the piece of paper that they can't see, or read what's on the random number generator. And we're talking random numbers up to, in some cases, 12, 16 digits long. They are getting these correct, not 30 to 40% of the time, which is, I think, where, MK Ultra and some of the CIA experiments got to in terms of a success level. These kids are getting them right 100% of the time. In fact, the only example they have of a kid slipping up was on a 16 digit long number. The kid missed maybe 2 of the 16 numbers and then asked to do it again, and then got them all right on the next attempt. Yeah, it's a very significant level of accuracy that I don't think anyone can ignore. So definitely take a listen to it. They are about to launch into some more controlled experiments with, I think they've got some universities behind them now, and they'll do a documentary soon too. I suspect it'll be a lot more in the public eye soon. It is building a lot of traction, but these children don't just have the ability to communicate telepathically, and that it is two-way communication in some instances. They also talk about a non-physical realm that they all visit. And the majority of these kids talk to it independently. They're across states that don't know each other, but they refer to this place called the Hill that they go to without their bodies, and they have abilities to communicate with each other and socialize with each other on the Hill, as well as do other things. And yeah, it's a very eye-opening, emotional, I guess, experience to listen to the podcast. And it's very hard when listening to each episode to not draw parallels between what they experience and what you've read about or heard about in terms of the abduction experience, in terms of telepathic messages that might be received by people prior to an experience. The parallels are really hard to ignore.
I think once all the orthodox scientists who were currently skeptical turn their full focus on this sort of stuff, I think we'll make quantum leap bounds in research. I think there's a lot of untapped potential that we've got. But I think once a critical mass of all the clever scientists out there can, drill down and look at this stuff, then we should make some great advances. As you say, when we encounter ETs, we read about stories. There's the telepathy. Sometimes they can levitate. They seem to exhibit a suite of abilities that we don't seem to have, or you hear about occasionally. I did once meet a photographer who'd been around the world. And he met a monk in some monastery, and he saw him levitate off the ground. So, I think it was like years of meditation. He got to this ability where he could do some of these sort of tricks, if you like. And bring it on. I'm all for the UFO research. I want the craft and the bodies, but I want us to realize our full potential as well. It's all interlinked.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. And one thing I've been really looking into recently, personally, is quantum mechanics and the new Willow chip that Google came out with. I'm not sure how familiar you are with all that, but I can't help but think about this: how there's this swell that's going on in not only the UAP, UFO, alien abduction realm, but like as you mentioned with the hitchhiker effect, you're starting to draw in these parallels with the paranormal, like the quote unquote ghosts and the apparitions that people are seeing. Telepathy, all of a sudden, there's these, like Diane Powell's work in the telepathy tapes. You're starting to see, wow, this actually might be a real thing. And I really think, I'm curious of your take on this, but I'm under the belief that when quantum computing and artificial intelligence, when they come together, that's putting pressure on our governments and maybe some of those secret holders, those secret programs, the USAPs, to say, okay, once we get generalized intelligence, artificial intelligence out there, it's going to become apparent that these things are real. So there's this increased pressure from these sources to start slowly disclosing these things. And I say slowly, but in a more rapid way than we've seen in years. What do you think about that? Is that something that with your work that you could maybe understand that, or do you think that I am completely off base?
I know a lot of people touch on AI, but it's not really my area of speciality, to be honest. But one thing I do think about is the AI is run by algorithms. What if ET is psychically controlling these algorithms? So we're typing in questions and we're getting answers. Isn't it a perfect subliminal way for some aliens with their tech to interface it with our computers and fuck about with the algorithms, if you pardon the French? And then that could control you effectively. Then you've got a situation where you can control the thinking of a lot of people in the world.
Wow,
That's my angle on AI anyway.
I've never even thought or heard about that. That's a really fascinating point. It goes to the nefarious aspect of your research too.
Yeah, it's my nefarious angle again. Sorry.
Yeah, no, hey, don't apologize. That's why we're here.
Mr. Pessimist here. Yeah.
No, I think that's a valid point. I really do. That's really interesting. What's your take on the main players in the UAP space currently, like the Knapp, the Corbells, the Elizondo? You mentioned Jacques Vallée earlier.
Yeah. Jacques Vallée, I'm not a massive fan of. He's written some really important books over the years, but I watched an interview a while back, and he said he doesn't feel the phenomenon's a threat. Or, hang on a minute, as the things I've outlined earlier. And he's got this I think he's going on the interdimensional, it's not nuts and bolts, there's more to it than that. But I like the hybrid model where it's nuts and bolts and you can have the woo at the same time. The going through the bedroom walls is their technology. It doesn't necessarily mean they're interdimensional. Lou Elizondo I like. I think he's got a lot. Some people give him a lot of bad rap, but I think he's a genuine bloke. I like Lou. Christopher Mellon, I think he knows more than what he's letting on. Goladet's come forward. Yeah, he seems decent. Corbell, I think his enthusiasm's there. I think he means well. He might not be the most articulate, not as maybe as polished as some of the other speakers, but he's doing his best, and he's obviously got contacts on the inside, and he's released some bits of footage. Again, he probably knows a bit more than what he's letting on. Some people think he's got a bit of an ego, but we're all working for the greater good. We're all trying to get the information out, and you're going to get different personality types involved. So, but yeah.
I really like Gallaudet. I some of the stuff that he was saying and some things I've read about him makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we were advanced enough to go to another habitable place and we had the technology to do that, I mean, hiding in the oceans to a species that they can't detect you there. I mean, it just completely makes sense.
Yeah,
it's so logical. Yeah,
mountains and under the sea are the two obvious choices.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
70% of the earth is water, so why not?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many.
You've got transmedium craft and go underwater, so why not?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the 4chan whistleblower that said that there's a base that's in the Bermuda Triangle as well?
Yeah, was that the one published on Reddit?
Yeah, I think it was on Reddit and 4chan. I think it was originally on 4chan, but I think there was some like copies on Reddit. Yeah.
I think there's quite a lot of information if it's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, I do remember the bit about Bermuda Triangle, but I mean, I think as well, actually think about Pat Price was a famous remote viewer, and he felt there was a base in the Bermuda Triangle as well, and that was something he remote viewed, I think was in the early 70s. He's like one of the fathers of remote viewing. I think remote viewing is one of the tools we've got at our disposal that could open a lot of secrets in terms of what's going on in these bases. The aliens are going to tell you what's going on there. So give some blind, targets to some really good remote viewers, and that could hopefully tell us what's going on in these places.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. Remote viewing is incredible. Everything I read about it just blows my mind.
There's a guy called Daz Smith. He's a British guy. He's part of a team of remote viewers around the world, and they do a monthly report, and there's a few things they remote viewed, like predicting the future, like a month or so ahead, that they've got really, really solid results on. So look at Daz Smith if you're not familiar with him on Twitter.
Dath Smith?
Daz, yeah, D-A-Z, Daz Smith.
Dad Smith, got it.
Yeah, he's. I've seen some interviews. He's really, really humble guy, good at what he does. Yeah.
Very fascinating stuff. I'm going to check that out. I'm learning so much right now. I'm like a kid on Christmas. It's great.
I wanted to ask Matt around hierarchy amongst different ET species. You referenced different species, and we've all heard of the greys. Nordics, tall whites are a common one. Reptilian, insectoids, things like that. People like Gary Nolan have referenced multiple kinds of ETs and a sort of hierarchy amongst them. I was wondering if you could talk to that, and maybe even talk to any ideas or thoughts you have around the existence of different species, their interaction with us, whether those interactions happen around the same time in history or whether they've been spread out across different periods. Are we talking about ETs that coexist on Earth and maybe have some sort of diplomatic relationship? Like, what's your thinking around that topic?
Okay, so the Others of Humanity, we mentioned at the start, Channel Information, basically they're a group of ETs that are spying on the ETs on Earth, and they're reporting back through a guy called Marshall B. and Summers, and these 4 volumes are available online. One of the things they say is that there's more than one group of ETs coming here. There's several groups, and they're in competition for the resources of our planet. They can't breathe our atmosphere for long, so that's why they're creating hybrids that look like us, but they're psychically linked to them. And it's quite a long-term program that they've been trying to hone in on this sort of perfect hybrid. And the idea is these hybrids will be inserted into positions of influence on our planet, and that's how they'll be able to control things. But in terms of ET taxonomy, I can only really go on what we read. So you've got like the short grey, then you've got the tall grey that seems to supervise the short, and then you've got some sort of either praying mantis or reptilian thing that's above those two. I don't really have any special inside information on more than that, really. I can only really say what we've all read, really, which is in terms of that basic hierarchy. But there seems to be sort of about 5 species: tall, short grey, reptoid, insectoids, like praying mantis type thing, and human looking. But one thing we need to be aware of is that these beings can create an image and project it into your mind. So if someone's taken on board and they see a beautiful blonde Nordic man and woman, that might be the case, or it could be some ugly little grey that's projecting those images. So the only taxonomy you can get solidly is if you've got a bunch of dead bodies in front of you where they can't play any trickery on you. You can see them, what they actually look like. But whilst they're conscious beings, these entities, it's very difficult to extrapolate from abduction accounts. Is the person seeing what they're reporting, or is there something else that's actually creating that image? There's a book called by Carla Turner, the last book she wrote, and there's a chap in there, and for years he thought he was meeting these spiritual human-looking entities, and when he went under hypnosis, and this hypnotist was quite skilled, could drill down and probe what was going on, they were actually reptilians that were creating these images in the abductee's mind. So we need to be mindful of what people report, but until the hangar doors open and we get to see all those dead cadavers, it's very difficult to know exactly what they look like. But the sort of 4 or 5 basic themes seem to keep cropping up. And the Allies of Humanity say that these groups are multi-ethnic, which again is what we see in the data. You're seeing different taxonomies within the same abduction quite often. I don't really have any more information than that, really.
What's fascinating to me is as you may or may not know, the main focus of my podcast is to speak with experiencers, and like this is more like a bonus episode because we're speaking to an expert in yourself. But the next episode I'm going to release, I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Jeff Selver, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he also wrote a book called The Rising, and he is.
I'm not familiar now.
Okay, he's an experiencer that through hypnotic regression basically remembered that he had been abducted by the Greys 26 times. And his story is incredible. I'm actually going to break it into like a 3 or 4 part series, with part 1 coming out in about 5 days or so. And his story is so fascinating because he was aboard a ship. He he met a gray he calls the elder, and the reason why he calls her that is she seemed to be a little bit older and a little bit more like the queen, so to speak, I guess you can say. She had an elongated head, similar to what you would see in those like Peruvian skulls, is the way he describes it. And he, without going to his whole story, because this will turn into a 4-hour podcast if I tell everything, but the thing that I want to bring up is he talks about a hybridization program and how they actually took his seed to help the hybridization program as part of the story that he tells, among other things. And a lot of the things you're saying about implanting things in your mind is very much a part of his story. Full transparency, it was really hard for me to even comprehend some of the things he was saying, because the timeline of events and the way that he remembered these events is very confusing. But once you understand it, it all lines up, and it kind of orbits around this idea that these beings have the ability to implant memories in our brain, and also with it's like he describes it as a frequency. When you're around them, you operate at a higher frequency, and they can show you things and bring things up from past lives and all this really, really fascinating things. And he passed a lie detector test with flying colors, and it's another data point into the hybridization theory. So I'd be really curious at some point, if you're open to it, to maybe kind of get you two together to kind of have a meeting of the minds, and with your knowledge.
Okay.
Of all your research and his actual experience, I think that could be a really fascinating conversation potentially at some point. So if you're down for it.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
I just backtracking a little bit more as a point of clarity, Matt. You mentioned Paula Turner. Is that in that book? Is that the book Into the Fringe or Taken? I think she wrote a couple of books.
There's 3 books. There's Taken, Into the Fringe, and I think it's the other third one that I can't remember off the top of my head. Can you Google Carla Turner there?
Yeah, I can have a look. I think, if my memory serves, she was she died.
Masquerade of Angels. That's the book.
She died quite young, right? And I think there's sort of a conspiracy around.
Yeah, she had aggressive breast cancer. I mean, there's a lot of researchers that don't die prematurely, and cancer is unfortunately relatively common. So I think occasionally you're going to get a researcher that probably is going to get cancer. So I don't, it's like Professor Mack, there's conspiracy there. Well, he was knocked down by someone who'd been drinking alcohol,
It does happen.
I don't necessarily see a conspiracy there. I could say it's or she was, anti-alien and the aliens were out to get her. But unfortunately, in the UK, 1 in 2 people will get cancer at some point. So I think that's just an unfortunate statistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Masquerade of Angels is a great book. Highly recommend Masquerade of Angels. You get to see through the BS and how these aliens will try and manipulate people and make them see something that isn't actually there. It's a really good book.
There is an interesting connection between some of the UAP sightings and the idea of projections, in that even with some of these drones flying over the States at the moment, a lot of them don't seem to show up on traditional surveillance equipment, radar, those sorts of things, which, people talk to cloaking devices, but I've always wondered, could they just be projections of a craft?
That's exactly what I think. I mean, if you're an advanced civilization, you've got the technology, why would you send up physical craft all around the world? Why not just, press some buttons and send up a load of realistic projections there that don't show up on radar and are immune to being taken down? You can't take down a holographic projection, can you? Like with some of the cryptids, I think the holographic projections, it's a good tool to use if you're going to manipulate people and mess them around. Especially if you can create something that's hyper realistic. Why not?
You just kind of blew my mind a little bit. I'm not going to lie. When you said that, like, the cryptids being holographic projections.
Well, they get shot at and they don't die, and you can't take down a drone, so you've got a commonality there.
Yeah, because I am just starting to get into the Bigfoot realm, thanks to Josh. And I've always thought that Bigfoot was a load of BS, and that it's people are mistaking maybe bears in the woods for something, because bears are known to stand on their hind legs and walk and things like that. So that was, there's never been a clear image of it and all these things, right? But recently I've heard some stories of Bigfoots and having some elements of like just apparitions and just moving things and just like having this element of paranormal around it. And I've never heard that until I heard some of these stories, and having you just say that about having maybe cryptids. I know maybe you weren't intending me to think of Bigfoot, but it is interesting to think of it that way, that if maybe there is just one source or two sources. We talked about different alien races, but perhaps all of the paranormal things that people experience as humans are all related to that, and it can be explained away with holographic projections in a way.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got alien races that are coming here and they've got a secret agenda, one of their tactics is to confuse and to scare people, and you've only got to create some weird-looking cryptids, and you're creating a whole new industry and throwing people off the track. And you find a lot of the cryptids industry, they're very interested in cryptids. They're not really interested in UFOs and aliens and, why are they coming here and abductions. They're in their own camp with cryptids, So, it's a useful thing to create red herrings for people.
It's interesting, too. I'm not sure if you're a big video game fan.
I had a ZX81 40 years ago, and I've had many computers since.
Okay. Fair enough. But there is, with my studying of quantum mechanics, I know Josh knows this, there's this double slit experiment. And it kind of, without getting into the weeds of it, it kind of more or less proves that we live in a simulation, that an electron is in a state of superposition, and it's not until you look at it that it changes to either positive or negative, right? And I could go into the weeds there, but if you can just kind of bear with me for a second, let's just say we are living in a simulation, and that the universe is just running on some alien's supercomputer in his bedroom next to his fish tank or something like that, right? If that's the case, if we are living in a simulation, these ETs, possibly they're the ones that are making the code. They're the ones that have created this simulation. So just like in a video game, if you wanted to make a new character in a game, a couple lines of code, boom, there you go. And then now all of a sudden this character is in this game. And
who created the aliens?
Well, that's now we're getting. I'm gonna have to take a shot of whiskey or something like that after that question, because yeah, that's the $1 million question. Who do you think created the aliens?
I like I said earlier, I think there's a physical realm, and I think there's non-physical realm. So you could say, in a sense, we're in a simulation because this isn't the greater reality; it's only sort of part of it. But I think creation started and life has evolved, utilizing physical laws all over the universe, and there'll be civilizations at various levels of advancement, some behind, some similar to us, some ahead. Some might be very secular, some might be very spiritual, some might be very warlike, some may be very peace-loving. I think there's probably a whole permutation across the universe of civilizations, but I think all sentient beings have that spark, that sort of spirit that survives their death and goes through reincarnation cycles. I think that might be a fundamental thing to all these visitors that visit us. I think all sentient life, God, if you like, metaphysicians often say God wanted to experience the physical, so he created the physical realm, and we're all part of God. That's the bit that survives death, and all the spirits in the ocean, that's God, that sort of thing. When I was 7, a little story, the teacher in class all asked us to draw a picture of God, and everyone drew an old man with a beard, and I just drew a flame. So I thought God was like an energy, not a human form. So I was thinking a bit outside the box then.
Yeah.
I love that. I agree with that. And Josh has really opened up my eyes a lot to the religions of the world and the similarities between them. And I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 12 years, and they always say that, God's all around you, and he can, his spirit is within you, and you're a part of him, and all these things. And I always thought when I was little that, yeah, like you said, he's a big man in the clouds with a gray beard and a white robe, and he's all around us. That's kind of what you're taught. But as I get older and as I look into more of these experiences that people have, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It seems like there is this energy around us, and even looking into quantum mechanics, like I said, I feel like that's almost strengthening my faith in a way
Yeah.
that I did not explain. Because usually when you look into science, that deviates from faith. But
I only got a C in physics, so I don't read too many physics books.
I don't even know if I ever studied physics in school, to be honest with you. But with everything going on, I've just been through osmosis. When I go to bed, I just put on like a physics video on YouTube and I go to sleep to it, and I try to absorb as much of that information as I can. And my wife hates it. She always yells at me when I put on a video with Michio Kaku or one of these great physicists that are talking about, quantum something.
I've got a question for you guys, right? So I'm interested in UFOs, you are as well. I hardly ever dream about UFOs and aliens. Do you find that? Do you dream about them a lot? I don't.
No?
Hardly ever have dreams about aliens or UFOs.
I can't recall a single dream in my life about the topic.
Weird, isn't it?
And isn't that funny too, that a lot of the experiencers that I've talked to that had an experience, thinking of Miriam from episode 1, most people, when you hear a story, they say, oh, she's just dreaming. This is just a dream. But you're absolutely right. You never dream about them. I think about them all the time. You think you have a dream about them. I don't.
It's probably because I'm thinking about so much shit when I'm conscious that my mind's had enough. So when I sleep, the switch is off.
Yeah. You sound like my wife a little bit now.
No more. Can't think anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. She's like, don't you ever get tired of this stuff? I'm like, no, I don't. I'm trying to find out what is the universe. It's a very hard thing it takes time to dedicate it to it. So very awesome stuff. All right. Well, I think we, let's try to bring this boy home here. Unless, Josh, do you have any other questions before we try to wrap it up?
I was the only other one I was sort of keen to discuss is the last question on the document I sent you, Justin, around looking into the future. More so the last sort of 1 or 2 paragraphs there that are focused on disclosure. It does feel like we're being funneled towards some sort of point of disclosure or reveal of something, and I hear it only ever discussed from the human side, but I wonder what your thoughts are, Matt, on disclosure from the other side, from the ET side.
This is what a lot of people forget. We tend to focus on the government. The government are hiding secrets. When they're going to tell us? Well, the ETs have about 80 years to tell us, and they're not. So what does that say about them? So if disclosure does occur, if the government does announce things, how will ET react? Because you'll have a reaction from the public. You'll have a reaction from the ETs as well. Will they then show themselves? Will they stay in the woods? It'll be interesting to see how things pan out. But you're right, the focus has been on the government. It's sort of bad human, good ET thing, Whereas, hang on, ETs have had 80 years to tell us why they're here, what they're doing here. Who gave them permission to build bases? Who's given permission to abduct people? Who gives them permission to take farmers' cattle? They've got a lot of answer for. But looking ahead, sort of just thinking creatively. I mean, if there was some sort of disclosure and ET showed themselves, I guess they might have some sort of damage limitations thing, where they might come up with some sort of narrative about the abductions and the mutilations. Maybe they might follow the Greer line where actually it was all done by humans. They have to be very adept at talking themselves out of what they've done. But maybe they've got experience. Maybe they've done this on other planets. Maybe they're cosmic scavengers and they go around other planets that are less evolved technologically than themselves, insert themselves there. We may not be the first planet that they've, tried to take over.
What do you think interests them about our planet, if you had a guess? Like, why us?
Why do I think they're interested? I think it might be that our planet has got a massive amount of resources in a galaxy where a lot of the planets are quite barren. We might have a very rich abundance of different flora, fauna, that they're minerals that they're interested in. So there is this theory that when civilizations become very technologically advanced, they end up stripping their resources and they need to look elsewhere. So you either become dependent on trade or you become sort of a scavenger looking for resources elsewhere. And if you don't have the biological resistance to deal with the diseases that are inherent on a planet like influenza, COVID, etc., what you'll have to do is create a hybrid between yourself and the indigenous population. And then, like I mentioned earlier, then insert them into positions of influence. And that's how you can gradually take over a planet without firing a bullet. You know, when people say, oh, well, if they were negative, they would have taken over by now. Well, maybe there's different or subtle ways of taking over a planet. And it might be quite long term by our time span. So, you know, that's why I think the hybrid program is taking place. I don't think it's just, you know, let's take a blood sample here and a blood sample there. I think there's a very disciplined, long-term agenda there of creating hybrids for... why else? Why would you want to keep creating hybrids over like 50, 60, 70, 80 years? Why would you keep doing it? You know, with regards to the mutilations, one of the things the Allies of Humanity say, there's several reasons why they take place. One is to do with the hybrid program. One is the creation of medicines, because basically all physical life is prone to disease. Another one, apparently there's like an illegal trade in body parts. So when they cut a lot of these people up, some of this stuff is shipped off. It sounds a bit sci-fi, but that's one of the things that they say, one of the reasons why these mutilations take place.
Ooh, that's... I was just going to say that a lot of the things you're talking about are in alignment with what Jeff Selver was saying, which is kind of like freaking me out a little bit, if I'm being honest.
There's an abductee called Ted Rice, who's one of the characters in Masquerade of Angels, Carla Turner's book. And he was taken to an underground base, and he was seeing people being dismembered on like a conveyor belt, and they were packing up the body parts. So that might be an insight he'd had into what I just mentioned.
I have a lot of reading to do after this. You mentioned time and you know why it's taking 80 years, and according to Jeff Selver, these beings basically, when you have anti-gravity or you can control gravity, as even Bob Lazar has said that's how they travel, that time and gravity are very much interconnected, and if you can control gravity, thereby you can control time. So, you know, 1,000 years, you can, just like those Interstellar movie, 10 years can go by in a day, you know, and depending on gravity. And yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. It's kind of freaking me out, the similarities of your research and Jeff Selver's story.
You can see why there's a cover up many levels. There's how would the public react to ETs, but there's also how would the public react to the ETs agenda if all that was exposed. It's sort of a double whammy. I mean, people are going to be freaked out at the reality of aliens anyway. Then if there is a dark agenda to why they're here, then, you know, it's sort of a double negative.
Yeah, it makes it infinitely worse, especially because the government's been saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about. It's just fine. We don't know what they are, but they're not harmful. It's all great. But yeah, you're right. If the truth comes out that there is a nefarious side to this, and if the governments of the world know that, and that's why they're not disclosing it, that actually checks out. You don't want to cause mass panic. So, especially if we can't do anything about it. I mean, if they're 1,000 years more advanced to us, which is like nothing in the grand scheme of things.
It makes me wonder with all these drone scientists lately whether they're trying to force a disclosure, because, you know, these drone things are all over the world now.
Yep.
So, you know, what's the psychology behind that? Is it a show of force? Is it a reconnaissance?
Yeah.
Are they trying to force disclosure? But you can imagine there must be a group of people deep in the Pentagon must be crapping themselves. Thinking, just go away. No, we've had enough. But, you know, it might get worse. The craft might get bigger. It might happen in daylight. You know, they can't control what ET does. That's the thing.
Yeah, I live in the States. I live maybe like an hour's drive from New Jersey, and I saw 5 drones one night.
Wow.
I'm 1,000% sure I saw them. They were just drones. There wasn't like an orb or plasmoid or anything. It was just definitely a drone. Maybe you've heard that. I think on January 1, there were like 2. They're calling them terrorist attacks in the States. One was in New Orleans, and another one was in Las Vegas, where a guy, Green Beret.
Oh, the car. The Tesla car.
And
yeah,
you know, it's just. And then you also have the Luigi, I forget his last name, Mangioloni or something like that. That he murdered the CEO of United Healthcare, all within the last like month. Like all these things are happening, and it's happening at such a fast rate. Even the fires that are in
climate change. Yeah, that's another one.
Yeah,
that's another biggie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
1.5 degree C increase worldwide.
Yep. So there's all these things that are happening, and even in California, there's videos now. Andrew Huberman, I believe, posted a video of people setting fire to like trees in California, like with gas cans, and it's being portrayed as this.
You're going to get,
it's just
you're going to get copycats, aren't you? That are just going to do it, or people that are pissed off or jealous. Potentially, it could happen any time in the future, couldn't that? Yeah.
Maybe I've been listening to too many conspiracy theories or talking to too many people. I don't know what it is, but I'm starting to like see through all the bullshit that's happening in the world, and it just seems like it's almost too much of a coincidence. And like you said, the drones are kind of like what's the psychology behind that? Why? What are they?
I think we must.
I don't know.
I think we mustn't lose faith though in the human species and governments, because you have to be careful that you don't get yourself into a situation where you're looking to outside for help. I think that's one of the alien strategies, that, all the governments here are corrupt, et cetera, the aliens can come in and they'll be better and help us. I think we have to, as Sheehan says, we have to maintain our agency, our sovereignty of our planet, and not look to the outside, because they could be waiting in the wings to come in. If a critical mass is pissed off with their governments, it opens the door for them to come in. So, we have to be wary of that. So the question of getting the right people in power, because they all seem to end up corrupt and siphoning money off, etc. But you've got this dark, in America it's quite complex. You've got this, what a lot of people say, this dark secret government that is the dark underbelly to what you see above the surface. And that obviously seems to have some connection with the UFO cover-up. So at some point that will have to be dismantled and exposed. But I think if there's enough, I think you can't really have a partial disclosure, because once you say, aliens are crashed and we've got bodies, then that opens the floodgates for loads of other questions, like what about abductions? What about mutilations? Once those floodgates open, then when you've got the mass media, the eyes of the world on the subject, it'd be very difficult for the government to keep the doors shut on what they haven't told.
Governments don't necessarily like to have to apologize to their people. There's strong motivation to keep it quiet, I suspect. Just before we wrap up, Justin, if you don't mind, referencing what you just were discussing there, Matt, and maybe this is a little off the deep end, but are you familiar at all with the theories around Eisenhower and Roswell, and then the original intent of the government to potentially disclose, but then H.G. Wells did the War of the Worlds broadcast on radio, and everyone freaked, thinking we were being invaded, and then that maybe being a catalyst to, no, we're not going to disclose anymore. Are you familiar with that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think throughout UFO history, UFO lore, there's been these stories of, we were about to disclose, but we didn't. There was that documentary that was made in the early 70s. I think it's UFOs Above and Beyond. And it was supposed to have had the Holloman Air Force landing in the 1960s, where 3 craft came in, 1 landed, and some beings got out and met some generals, and they drove the entity off in a Jeep. And that was pulled at the last minute. There's a researcher called Bob Exler. He was aware of, I think Disney were going to be involved in some sort of indoctrination program with regards to disclosure in the late 80s, and that got pulled. I think it was called Cosmic Journey. I think there's always been a sort of a to and fro between people in the intelligence community who want the information out and those that don't. And so far, there's, the other side's won. But throughout UFO lore, there's been these sort of stories of we're just about to release, and then we pull back. There's also the thing about agreements with aliens as well. There's the story of Eisenhower meeting aliens, and there's the Holloman Air Force landing that people talk about in the 60s. There may well be agreements. There is this basic idea that we'll give you some technology if you let us abduct people and take some cattle. And this goes back into the John Lear story from 1987, where he sort of repeats this story, and the government eventually realised that the abductions and the mutilations have got out of control and taken a lot more people than what were originally promised. So, yeah, there may be some truth to that. There's talk of these craft that are just dumped intact with no one inside. We say don't accept gifts off strangers. What's the ulterior motive? If you become excited by the technology and start salivating, it gives the aliens leverage. Well, okay, we'll give you another craft if you let us, abduct people, or can we build some bases here? Yeah, sure. We want your tech. So there could be a nefarious reason as to why craft are being dumped. I don't think it's for altruistic reasons, but even if the American government's got a craft and they're trying to reverse engineer, I mean, first of all, they have to work out how it works. Secondly, can they manufacture it? Thirdly, can they obtain the power fuel source? And fourthly, even if they've done that, can they control it if it's telepathic? So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome if you're in Lockheed Martin and you're trying to reverse engineer one of these things. I mean, the amount of mental discipline you'd need to fly something at 20,000 miles an hour, then stop on a dime and do a perpendicular turn. I don't know what sort of, how zen-like you'd need to be to control something that is that maneuverable and that fast. So I think the aliens probably thought, we'll give them technology because they won't be able to do much with it anyway.
Isn't that what Diana Pasalka was saying as well with the donations, I believe, right?
Yeah, the gifting fields, yeah.
Yeah.
It's this basic idea that you gift something and then we want more of it, and it gives the aliens leverage. It's quite a cunning trick of giving power to yourself.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
Just one last question. I wonder, Matt, do you, in terms of this disclosure and these stories we've heard of where we've come close to it before that you were just referencing, do you think anything is different this time around?
I think there's more momentum. I mean, we've had all these hearings in the House and the Senate. So I think we just need to be patient, but I think eventually the truth will out. People are saying this month's going to be big. I know we keep getting these buckle up statements on Twitter all the time, but I think the momentum's gathering. Now, once you get a few whistleblowers, others will follow, and then you'll get a critical mass. I do get a little frustrated though in these hearings when they say, "Well, I can only tell you in a skiff. I can't tell you in public," and then the politicians can't get in the skiff. That bit is frustrating, but I think once a critical mass of people, it's like with any movement, when you get a change in paradigm, once a critical amount are there, then the truth will come out in the end.
I'm gonna break my rule and continue this for one more second because I just thought of one more thing, but in two parts. You could do rapid fire if you want. What do you think of David Grush?
I think he's very intelligent, very articulate. And I think he's telling the truth. And he's very brave.
I agree.
He's faced a lot of threats. So, yeah, top man.
And what about Bob Lazar?
I've always been impressed by his body language, so I would lean towards him being genuine. And I think he's one of the first to talk about Area 51 as well. And John used to take him out and they'd see some weird craft flying around in the sky above Area 51, which was captured on film in the late 80s. So, yeah, body language-wise, he didn't come across a bit of a bullshitter. He seems quite laid back. I mean, he made a little bit of money from some documentaries, but he didn't go on the full-on conference circuit, which he could have done and milked it for many years. So, yeah, I mean, even if he's lying, he's planted the seed that the American government's got crash discs, which they probably have. So he's created a meme, if you like, which has truth to it. So even if he's lying, he's done a good thing.
Yeah. One more. Travis Walton.
I think he's genuine abductee. Yeah. I don't have any problem with him. I haven't read the case for a while, but he seems a good guy.
Okay. All right, very good. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Looking ahead, what's next for you? Do you have any upcoming projects, or are you continuing to research, or anything that you'd like to, for lack of a better phrase, like plug?
No, I don't have anything big in the offing, really. I occasionally tweak my website. I did some tweets on the conclusion about a few weeks ago. I put in some quotes from Gary Nolan about there being several species here in competition. But no, I don't really have any projects as such, no. Quite boring, really.
Aren't we all? Right? No, I'll put a link for BadAliens.info. Just viewer discretion advised. There are some graphic images on there, so I'll make sure to post that. And then, final thought. What's the most important thing that people should understand about extraterrestrial encounters?
That if a civilization is highly technologically advanced, it will necessarily mean that they're spiritually and ethically, morally advanced as well. Don't be dazzled by technology.
All right. You've made it to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for sticking around. I really do appreciate it. For those of you that are still here, I do have a quick question. Would you like to hear a bonus episode where we bring together Matt Hurley from this episode and Jeff Selver from episode 5? Jeff's firsthand experiences and Matt's extensive research could really lead to an incredible discussion about hybridization, abduction patterns, and the true nature of what's out there. I do think there may be some friction or some disagreements between Matt and Jeff, but I think that we're all adults here and that we can handle that. So if you guys agree and want to hear that, leave a comment and let me know, and I'll see if I can make it happen. If everyone that's still here can do me a huge favor and leave a nice comment and give us a 5-star review on all platforms, it would go a long way to really helping this podcast. Special thanks to Brett Jarvis for mixing and mastering, Josh Barretto for producing this episode. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please email us at stories@closeencounterclub.com. Thanks for listening and being a member of the Close Encounter Club.